In 1976, sports fans experienced a monumental happening in the world of combat exhibitions. Boxing legend Muhammad Ali and pro wrestling megastar Antonio Inoku duked it out in Tokyo to determine the dominant discipline. Fans flooded the sold-out Nippon Budokan Arena in Japan, and WWE's Vince McMahon sold 33,000 tickets for people to watch the broadcast at Shea Stadium in New York City. Billed as the War of the Worlds, the bout felt anything but that. For 15 rounds, Ali, who still wore boxing gloves, hopped around the ring, while Inoki sprawled out of the canvas, kicking him in the legs, which resulted in 2 major blood clots for the people's champion. The fight ended in a draw, and those in attendance booed and wanted their money back. Sports journalist Dave Meltzer would later say, "They were expecting something like a cross between a boxing match and a pro wrestling match and got nothing resembling either." Suffice it to say, it wasn't the greatest moment for the greatest or Inoki, whose nickname translates as fighting spirit that burns. Despite the lackluster showing from the two titans, that event sparked the world's growing interest in mixed martial arts. Nearly half a century later, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the Las Vegas-based mixed martial arts promotion company, has monetized combat sports in a way rarely attempted in boxing, focusing on the sport as a whole rather than individuals. And its president, the often abrasive profanity-prone Dana White, has developed the company into a brand beyond just its major stars. So put on your gloves and pop in a mouthguard as we take a look at how the UFC went from a disgusting spectacle boycotted in more than half of the US to one of the fastest growing sports leagues ever. As veteran voice of the Octagon Bruce Buffett says, the UFC was the brainchild of businessman Art Davie and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master Lorraine Gracie, with the goal of identifying the most effective fighting style. Their company, WOW Promotions, partnered with the Semaphore Entertainment Group to produce the events. Gracie was determined to prove that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at his particular dojo was the best in the world. So he entered his scrawny 176-pound son Royce in the tournament. He went on to win the whole thing. The early days of MMA were riddled with the use of steroids, fixed fights, and even behind-the-scenes Yakuza activity. Plus, the no-holds-barred nature of many promotions proved much more chaotic and brutal compared to today's bouts. In its early 90s infancy, UFC events orchestrated by Semaphore Entertainment Group resembled a carnival freak show more than a legitimate sport. The sport lacked any rules beyond no eye gouging, biting, or groin shots. Want to pull a hair? Sure. Headbutts? Be our guests. Looking to kick a downed opponent in the face? Tee off, brother. Gracie said that they even floated the idea of the ring being surrounded by a moat full of alligators before settling on the iconic octagon design. The fights were so violent, in fact, they provoked major legal setbacks for the burgeoning sport. Upon seeing UFC 1, the late Arizona Senator John McCain described the show as human cockfighting and wrote letters to all 50 states asking governors to ban the sport, and 36 actually did. Most major cities didn't want these fights anywhere near their borders, so the SEG was forced to host the events in smaller markets like Dothan, Alabama, Casper, Wyoming, and Lake Charles in Louisiana. These matches were hosted to crowds of only a few thousand. In 2000, state athletic commissions began recognizing unified rules that did away with dirty and unsafe fight tactics and in turn made MMA much more palatable and professional. In another blow to their image and profits, SEG was unable to secure home video releases for 7 of its UFC PPVs. The fledgling promotion was running out of options and money was on the brink of bankruptcy. The next year, casino executives Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta purchased the On the Ropes UFC for just $2 million and formed a new company, Zuffa, and placed White at the helm. The UFC and the broader MMA movement gradually evolved from an ugly bloody mess to a popular financial success with still plenty of blood.
And both of them having a tough time breathing.
Nowadays, the average UFC event reaches a viewership of anywhere between 300,000 and 2 million viewers.
He wins here at home.
The fights tap into the primal and universal nature of humans. Whether it's the submission-centric jiu-jitsu of Brazil, the aggressive knee and elbow strikes of Thailand's Muay Thai, or the slams developed by the ancient Greece, every culture has its own discipline and combat style. While not fighting to the death, MMA has parallels to the old gladiator days. Gregory Chase of Bleacher Report wrote that it's taking two people, putting them at the center of a surrounding crowd, and having them use all their mental and physical fortitude to come out the victor. Beyond the UFC, there are major promotions throughout the world. ONE in Singapore, Rising in Japan, and KSW in Poland. Plus, putting on a fight doesn't really require a specific stadium, just a venue big enough to house a 30-foot in diameter octagon, and this means that event can be held anywhere. The UFC has already hosted fights in nearly 30 countries. MMA is also one of the few sports that showcases both male and female athletes on the same cards. Fighters like Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes, and Weili Zhang, who have all headlined events, are responsible for attracting whole new crowds of female and international viewers. The overall appeal has translated into a lucrative business, especially for the UFC, which generated roughly $1 billion in revenue in 2021. No longer restricted to just pay-per-views and home video sales, the UFC finally landed at mainstream television. In the early 2000s, it first lived on Spike TV, the defunct basic cable dude bro home of Blue Mountain State and 1,000 Ways to Die, before partnering with Fox for 7 years. In 2019, the promotion signed its biggest broadcast deal yet, when ESPN bought exclusive rights in a 5-year $1.5 billion deal. Global entertainment company Endeavor paid just over $4 billion to buy a majority stake in Zuffa in 2016, and 5 years later, raised another $1.75 billion to purchase the rest of the business shortly before going public. Governments also came around the blood sport once they saw money could be made hosting UFC fights. New York was the last free zone until 2016. That year, Conor McGregor squared off with Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight title at Madison Square Garden in an event that generated $1.5 million in tax revenue for the state. Business partners are stepping into the ring too. The UFC has a video game deal with Electronic Arts that ends in 2030, an exclusive clothing partnership with Venom, and the company recently inked a $100 million agreement with crypto company VeChain. Additionally, the promotion launched its own NFT in January 2022 The first pack sold out in just 4 hours. Despite all the growth and enthusiasm, UFC has yet to overtake boxing as the marquee combat sport, at least as far as the athletes are concerned. Pound-for-pound boxer Canelo Alvarez and UFC fighter Alexander Volkanovski are some of the best athletes in combat sports. One made $45 million in his last fight, and the other just earned $500,000. Can you guess who made what? Low fighter pay relative to boxers is a very sore subject for White, who in the summer of 2022 declared that raises are never gonna happen while he is there. The UFC's roughly 700 fighters have seen their salaries increase about 15% annually over the past 5 years, faster growth than athletes in other sports leagues, but they're also technically still independent contractors and receive minimal health benefits. Former UFC champion Tyrone Woodley earned roughly $5 million over the course of his 12-year professional MMA career. In August 2021, he made $2 million in just one night, losing a boxing match via decision against YouTuber Jake Paul.
There's a good right hand, and that drops Woodley, and in from Jake Paul. Lead hand and put.
4 months later, they ran it back, and this time, Woodley got KO'd, but he still walked away with more than $1 million. Succeeding in the mixed martial arts business and beyond is not just about raking up wins. If that were the case, athletes like Gegard Mousasi, Zabit Magomed-Shapirov, and Leon Edwards, the current world champ, will be international household names. Conor McGregor knew his mouth and personality could take him to heights that even his left hook couldn't. So he built a brand beyond the octagon and adopted a Ric Flair-style persona.
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the f he wants.
McGregor rocked the MMA world with relentless trash talk, fancy suits, and highly profitable side hustles like Proper 12 Whiskey, which he sold a majority stake in for $600 million in 2021. On top of fighting in 8 of the 10 most purchased UFC PPVs, he's also provided his likeness to a Call of Duty installment and will appear in a supporting role in the upcoming remake of Cheesy's 80 classic, Roadhouse. Other fighters have expanded too, and occasionally depended on side hustles too. Dustin Peoria has his own hot sauce brand. George Masvidal launched the Bare Knuckle Game Bred Fighting Championship while still signed to the UFC. And Demetrius Johnson, possibly the greatest flyweight ever, worked as a forklift operator well into his fighting career. The UFC is now worth roughly $10 billion, according to White, and has seen its top line grow at a compound annual growth rate of 21% a year since 2005. That's a lot of growth in a short amount of time, but the company still has a way to go. $10 billion, the MLB made more than that in revenue alone in the past season. But the UFC still has plenty of gas in the tank, and the organization understands better than anyone that, as Ali said, the will must be stronger than the skill.